Okay, well, we're getting some people to pick up here live on Facebook. So I think we'll go ahead and get the introduction started so we can start moving along here. All right, so welcome to our third week of Munch on This. And this week we have a little bit of a change up. We have two of our mentors with us tonight and on Thursday night. So we're pretty excited about that. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Trish Faring. I'm the field representative and range management specialist for the North Dakota Grazing Lands Coalition. I ranch with my husband and two daughters north of Beach. So I'll be your host for this evening. And then also joining me is Jay Fear. And Jay is going to be acting as our moderator this evening. Jay has a passion for soil health and for teaching and sharing that with others. And he continues to work with the Minokan Farm, monitoring plants, animals, and soils. So I'm so glad Jay agreed to do some of these sessions with me. It's been going really well, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed it. So just a couple of things, just keep yourselves muted when you enter. And then we will at the end have a question and answer session where you can unmute yourself and ask questions to Christof. And if you have any technical difficulties, if you want to type into the chat on the bottom, we're also streaming live on Facebook tonight. And this is also being recorded, and that will be posted on our YouTube channel as well as onto the website and a few other places as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jay and let Jay introduce Christof this evening, and we'll move this along.
Thank you, Trish. And a big shout out to the North Dakota Grazing Lands Coalition. I think this has been a great series, and there's been a lot of conversations and a lot of discussion. And I think those are, our learning mechanisms. And this series of meetings, Munch on This, I think has gotten off to a really great start. So appreciate all the work you've done on it, Trish. Thank you very much for that. So this evening, we have Christof Just. And not sure if it's going to be a solo or if it's going to be with Kelly, or exactly how you're going to do that. But his topic is going to be cattle plus crops equal our struggles and successes. And I think this is a real opportunity for all of us, because one of the big learning mechanisms is when somebody takes a system and shares it with you. And I don't take that lightly, because not everyone is first of all willing to do that, because some people are a little too uncomfortable to do it. But when somebody does do it, we benefit just tremendously, and creates kind of that sharing atmosphere. So Christof and his wife Kelly farm and ranch near Lemoore, and I did have to look up the small town of Berlin, and so I checked that out. The cropping system utilizes corn, beans, rye, field pea, forage barley, and cover crops. So he's got some really nice diversity in there. While the livestock operation is a cow-calf enterprise, and he's going to get a little more into the specifics of these as we go. But the Just operation focuses on some of these items that we're going to talk about, I think, a little bit more this evening. Everything from no-till planting to soil health principles to livestock on the land and the associated water developments. So you can start to see already it's going to have a bit of a systems approach to it from the viewpoint of how everything connects. So this evening, Christof is going to share some of his experiences. And so we want to give him a virtual welcome to Christof and Kelly Just, and thank you so much for being here this evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Jay. Thanks, Trish. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invite to be here. It is humbling to be asked to share some of the stuff that our family is doing at our place, and it's also intimidating at the same time, because the Grazing Land Coalition always says such a high caliber speakers and members, but it's also been my definite pleasure to listen and learn from all of you guys. So I guess I'll try and take my turn here. And this is my first go at a at a presentation. So thank you guys for being my guinea pigs. I would definitely consider myself to be a student of this stuff rather than the teacher, but some of the people that I have been trying to learn from are Jay Fear and Dwayne Beck, Alan Williams, Ray Archuleta, Jim Garish, Dave Brandt, and that's just to name a few. There's a long list, and I apologize for those I don't mention, but the people in my family would probably say I need to get a hobby other than watching YouTube videos on soil health and regenerative ag practices, but I think it's a pretty good way to spend some time, and especially when it can be done driving back and forth across a field in a tractor planting, or while feeding, or even pull up and listen while driving, but I don't advise watching so much while you're driving. A little bit about us. These are my greatest assets for sure. My lovely wife, Kelly, she wears many hats. She helps out whenever she can on the farm. She works in the tax department at Ag Country. She's an EMT and manages the Lemoore Volunteer Ambulance Service, substitute teaches, too many more to list. My oldest is Carly. She's a senior in high school. She's in the North Dakota National Guard and completed her basic training last summer and on her way to AIT this summer, Fort Leonard Wood, and she enjoys her horse and has a small chicken egg business and likes running and working out and reading. And then there's Katrina. She's a junior high school and she enjoys playing sports, working out, socializing. And she told me, Dad, it's going to be funny to see people dropping off like flies as you put them to sleep here tonight. So that's some of the encouragement I get. But and then Cole, he likes playing sports, snowmobiling, dirt biking, and Cole has really become a great help, and he really enjoys almost any job on the farm, and it's nice to have his help as he's getting older. And then we have Landon. Landon, I don't know if I think you're on here. Sorry, I couldn't find a little better picture of you there, but he's worked for us for the last 3 years or so, and we're very lucky to have him. Landon didn't grow up on a farm, but has aunt and uncles and family with livestock, and Landon's particularly interested in the livestock, cattle. He's building a small herd of his own, and he's wintering them at a neighbor's with not much more than some poly wire and bale grazing. So I'm impressed. Just a quick history. I grew up on our family farm near Berlin, and our farm had a history of livestock, especially sheep, but cattle too. Just a couple pictures from the early 70s and late 60s of some of the sheep on our place. But from a young age, I knew I forgot something here. Oh, yeah, when I was young, the livestock did go, and I grew up on a conventional tillage, small grain farm with some row crop. But from a pretty much a young age, I knew I always wanted to come home and farm. But while I was at NDSU in about 95, Mom and Dad had to get out of the business because of economic struggles on the farm, and probably more so my mother's failing health due to MS. But so they had an auction sale, and the land was rented out. And the fact that I couldn't come home at that time and farm kind of pushed me to finish my degree at NDSU, and I started working as a sales agronomist in the Red River Valley, where everything was conventionally tilled and high inputs. And but I was eventually able to get a job close to home in Lemoore and get a small start with livestock by bought a few bred heifers and was working. And for those of you who have worked full time and had livestock to take care of at home, you know the joy of leaving for work in the dark and coming home in the dark and hoping everything is okay, especially on days like today. You hope you didn't come home and deal with frozen water or whatever, but because mom and dad had moved to Minneapolis, St. Paul area at the time for better health care, so there wasn't anyone around the farm. But I did get lucky and married up big time around this farm, but Kelly was busy teaching school. Our start with no-till and livestock integration. So I'm trying to make a long story short here, but also trying to give a little context as to where we came from. While I was still employed as an agronomist in about 2000, one of the growers I was working with had grazed his cows on a quarter of corn stalks for a good chunk of the winter. And the following spring, he no-tilled soybeans into the stalks. It was kind of a new concept at the time, but at harvest, he told me they were his best yielding beans as compared to his conventionally tilled beans. And the light bulb kind of started to go off here. And I started to see the synergisms that can happen when livestock is incorporated into a cropping system. The cows were fed, the residue was managed, nutrients were cycled, and biology was stimulated, although we weren't talking much about soil biology 20 years ago. And I do apologize to the 100% range people for talking about farming, because honestly, I would just as soon talk about range management. But in our neck of the woods, I think we almost have to look for ways to incorporate livestock into a cropping system. It can be a real struggle to cover our high land costs with only grazing. And kind of unfortunately, I think, but we're basically corn and soybean country, and that's what drives land costs, along with all the government support those crops get. But that's a discussion for another day. Opportunity. So I wanted to farm and ranch, but didn't have any machinery or access to parents' machinery. But it may have been a blessing in disguise. I was able to get a low interest loan and rent some land from mom and dad and other relatives, and I'm very thankful for that. They did everything they could to hold on to the land that they did have, and they could have made things easier for themselves at the time by paying some debt, but they really worked to give us that opportunity. So anyway, I had a neighbor who I was able to hire to custom plant. He had bought a new no-till air seeder that he never used to no-till himself, but he had this air seeder, and I hired him and had it custom sprayed and custom combined, and timing is kind of everything. But we had some good crops and made money and did this for a few years until we were able to start buying some pieces of our own. But my point to all this is, I think having to start this way kind of helped me to look at things differently, and my eyes were open to a different way of doing things. And for any beginning farmer out there, I just really want to stress the importance of networking and building relationships with neighbors and family and other people, because well, to this day, I still have good working relationships and share some machinery, and we work back and forth. And and hopefully it's mutually beneficial. But so the goal started out trying to create a situation where cows and cash crops could mutually benefit from each other. In other words, synergism, just like ruminants and prairie plants benefited from each other for hundreds of thousands of years. And we've gone further down this road and just realized that our fields and pasture need to be looked at as an ecosystem. And in order for an ecosystem to function, certain things need to be in place, such as the 5 principles of soil health. And I think we're all becoming pretty familiar with these 5 principles, but I really think we need to be very familiar with them, because they're kind of the foundation. And so whenever we're doing something, we can ask ourselves, you know, does this fall under these principles? And that being said, I'm not getting every one of these done on every acre, but it is the goal. And you could look at the 5 principles or I look at them almost like the 10 commandments. This is my religious sermon here, but you know, it's not going to work out too good for us in the end if we just pick and choose the ones that are easiest or most convenient to follow. So what I want to share with everybody tonight are some of the practices that we have been trying in order to implement these principles. And one of the tough things is we need to make money and things have to cash flow. And it seems like it can be a challenge, you know, short-term cash flow needs versus longer-term soil health investments. But I like the saying, we have to be in the black to be in the green. Basically, if we're not making money now, we're not going to be here to operate and carry out the regenerative things we want to do. Unless I win the lottery, which I don't play, so it's going to be tough. Another thing to me, the component of our ecosystem that we are I think just barely beginning to understand is the microbial one and all the biology that lives in and on animals and in the soil and how they're related to each other. And I probably know just enough to be dangerous here to talk about this subject, but I just feel more and more that the importance of biology and microbes just can't be overstated. Everything starts with biology. Without biology, we can't build soil aggregates, and that's just one of the keys. If we don't build soil aggregates or I'd call them water and wind stable aggregates, then we don't have a functioning water cycle and things start to go downhill from there. Without biology, nutrients aren't available to plants. Ruminants can't digest food, can't digest forage without biology, or probably any animal for that matter. Nutrients can't be recycled without biology. But a point I would like to make is that I don't think we have to understand every interaction between every species of microbe and soil and relationship to every plant and every animal. I just heard the other day there's, you know, 1 million species of fungi that they think we haven't even identified yet. But the point being, I think we just need to know they're there and respect them. And this means giving them the things that any living creature needs: food, water, air, space. And this is what we're doing if we follow the principles of soil health. We just kind of setting the system up to work. You know, an example is of a principle is animals on the landscape. I just think they're the bridge that keep the biology going on nights like tonight. With the temperatures, the way I'm thinking the biology is a little bit slower, but it's not in the gut of a ruminant. It's a perfect temperature and the perfect moisture content, and they keep the biology going in the heat of the summer when it's maybe bone dry. I used to look at manure being the most valuable benefit of keeping livestock out of the lots and in a field, but I think it's actually the microbes in the manure and in the urine and in the saliva and on the hair, and they're basically inoculating the soil and keeping the biology going. Even conventional tillage grain farmers are starting to recognize the value of microbes in their soil. I had a salesman in my yard the other day trying to sell me some microbes in a jug, biologicals they're called. No, he didn't really want to talk that much about all the ways to promote microbes in any holistic way, or wasn't really saying, well, I asked him, he wouldn't tell me because he had developed it, but he wouldn't tell me what was in the jug. But, you know, just buy it and put it with my starter fertilizer, and I should be able to keep tilling and not have diversity and not have animals and be fine. He did mention that he actually takes a shot of this stuff when not feeling the best to promote his own gut health, which, you know, maybe we are starting to understand that there is a relationship between the microbes in our gut and in animals and in the soil, because he was getting a plant response and he took it for his own health. So what does that say? This picture is, hang on a second. Oh, so farmers have, they've forever recognized that earthworms are good things, and that earthworms are part of the soil biology. And this poster has hung above the parts counter of our local red dealership for a number of years. I took a picture of it. I hope they don't mind. But I guess it's good to know you just need to have the right color tillage equipment to promote biology, which to me is like saying if I use the right color wrecking ball to smash your house, it'll promote the living conditions within. I guess if I pick on one color, I should pick on all of them, but these were in the John Deere's Furrow magazine, and I just think it's really interesting that that piece of equipment from probably the early 1900s, if you read that fine print, it's basically advertised as doing the exact same thing as this piece of equipment from 2021. So are we really advancing? Oh, Richard Long, I think you might be on here, but my neighbor Richard, we converse quite a bit about trying to figure all this stuff out, and he asked the question the other day. He said, what value is it to a grain farmer to have me graze my cows on his land? And I'm not sure, but maybe this will be our competitive advantage someday. Instead of someone selling us biology in a jug, we can go around and inoculate their fields with probiotics and for the soil by grazing them, and we're going to get paid big bucks to do it. But so filling in the gaps, what we're really trying to do with covers is fill in the gaps. We need to fill in that period of time before and after the cash crops, and this picture here, it doesn't quite show the green like I wanted, but it's annual ryegrass in December and hairy or winter rye and hairy vetch in February. That's kind of filling, they're both green, and that's kind of filling in some gaps. It's not that long in between December and February. So how long is our growing season? Longer than I think we sometimes think. I mean, stuff is slowed down, but it's still green. There's still activity. And then one of the positives of livestock integration is we can turn that cover into a cash crop rather than that cover only being an investment in soil health. It can be turned into cash through the livestock. And I just kind of like this picture, this cowbine. I like to think of it this way, you know, what are some of the things we can do with the covers. So that's kind of a little bit on the principles. And now I guess I'm just going to talk a little bit about and share with you guys a few practices that we're doing that hopefully are profitable and build soil health at the same time. And the first one here that we've been trying for a few years is grazing rye and then planting a soybean crop into the green and growing rye. Just a quick story about this picture here. If you've ever been in a winter wheat field or a rye field in spring, late May, it's unbelievable how many duck nests there are, and it just goes to show if you just give wildlife an opportunity, they absolutely capitalize on it. And they really want that green growth. They don't want all the dead growth of a CRP field, or they don't want a tilled field. Obviously they need cover. And so it's a little bit unfortunate, but when you're going through there with a planter, you don't know the nests are there until the duck flies up, but a lot of them escape in between the rows. So it was something that just really struck me the first year I planted green. But anyway, 2016 was the first year that we did plant green. And the plan was to graze the rye during calving season and then no-till beans into the still growing rye. And I was willing to give up some soybean yield because the value of grazing would hopefully make up the difference. And it turns out that a rye field is just an excellent place for cattle to be the end of April and May. Even during a rainy stretch, rye is just such a aggressive root system. It can really stand up to the traffic. And just a sidebar here. One thing about grazing rye, it can get ahead of you very easily, I found. Once it starts getting to the boot stage and then heading out, cattle really kind of don't want it. And I found that the first year I did it, I held off because I wanted more growth out of the rye and didn't want to graze it too soon. And then all of a sudden it was ahead of me. So I would err on the side of being out there too soon and moving across it fast if you're cell grazing it, to try and keep it a little more vegetative. But in the spring of 16, I think I was around 48 head days when I took the pears off and planted beans, and I used a value of $2 a head a day, which to a lot of you guys is pretty darn high. But having somewhere to go with new pears that time of year is just of great value to me. It's a clean environment with a fairly high plane of nutrition, and I would recommend maybe putting something out there for them to balance out on, because it is so lush, like some dry hay or even straw. But I also put some high mag tubs out there because I was worried about grass tetany, and I don't know if I had to be concerned about that or not, but I did it and didn't have problems. After the cattle were pulled off the end of May, soybeans were planted, and this picture here was the following year that we planted again. I didn't have a picture of the grazed off rye, but this was a picture of us planting into the rye nonetheless. And I think there's some key things to setting up a planter to be able to do this, but I won't get into that here. If anyone has any questions about that, feel free to get a hold of me or ask me later. After the beans were planted, a herbicide pass was made to terminate the rye. Kills easily with Roundup. And as the growing season went on, the beans were short, and I wasn't expecting a good yield. But when harvest rolled around, they did, I think, in the mid 40s that first year, and they were every bit as good as the rest of the farm. So I felt like this was definitely a success. Here's another year of us planting green in this shot with a little different planter. But so after my first experience, I was confident to try it on considerably more acres. And so I had an airplane fly on several hundred acres I had an airplane flying 60 pounds of rye on several hundred acres of unharvested standing corn in mid-September. And aerial seeding can be hit or miss, but we had some fall rains and got a good catch. This next year is where one of the struggle parts comes in. The following spring, and this is kind of the nature of this land that I had the rye flown on, but the water tends to pond a lot in the spring as the snow's melting. So the rye drowned out on all the low acres, and it was thicker than the hair on a dog's back on all the high ground. So one of the main goals with relay cropping and planting green is to help manage water and manage water without tillage. But in this year, we used way too much water on the high ground, and there was no rye to use water in the low ground where we really needed to use water. I managed to get the beans planted, but the yield suffered significantly, and I was kind of looking across the road at the neighbor's field, wondering, stressed out and wondering what the heck I was doing, and wondering how crop insurance was going to work out, but we kind of stuck to our principles, and I think there's so many costs associated with tillage that aren't being accounted for. Don't be tempted by tillage. It's not worth it. You're going to pay for it. And I'm trying to illustrate these with my pictures here, but I think the best scenario is to graze the cover crop when planting green. I haven't always been able to do that just because of fields that are farther away from home, and logistically, I just can't get cows everywhere I want. But I am a glutton for punishment and did try planting green again in 2020, this last year, and we had good results. I really do believe this practice has a lot of positives associated. In southeast North Dakota here, we just need to manage water better. And a lot of times our problem is excess water. And it's just the balancing act is not using too much water. So yeah, there's just a shot there of after harvest, and you know, there's nice rye cover, and there's no snert in the ditch next to this field, unlike most of the other fields when you drive down the highway. So that's my spiel on planting green. This slide doesn't have too much to do with anything, but my daughter has a goat, and this goat has had triplets for 4 years in a row, and these triplets terrorize my yard. They're good brush control, like my apple trees that I'm trying to establish. They love the bark of an apple tree. Anyway, so one of the next practices that we've been exploring is wide row corn with cover crop interseeded. The idea of wide row corn just really sparked my interest because of all the things it can potentially accomplish. And when I say wide row, I mean 60-inch. Our corn planters, a 30-inch corn planter, and so we skip every other row, and we're planting 60-inch corn. But to me, it just covers a lot of bases. We potentially we could hopefully harvest a cash crop, add lots of diversity to a rotation, provide an excellent grazing opportunity. And this last year was my first year experimenting with it, but due to our extremely wet spring, I ended up trying it on prevent plant acres. So the plan, it went to 100% grazing versus harvesting a corn crop and then grazing. Since the corn wouldn't be combined, I looked for the cheapest seed I could find, leftover plot seed, silage corn, and my dealer found some other carryover stuff. We no-tilled the corn in the first week of June, and I did put about 15 gallons of 28% down with the planter, but only on the corn rows. And the research done so far suggests leaving your plant population per acre the same as you would normally plant. You're just moving plants over and basically combining 2 rows into one. So say if we plant, 32,000 seeds per acre in a 30-inch row, that's a plant about every 6 inches. In a 60-inch row, that's a plant every 3 inches. This is pretty easily done with the newer style planters, and it's doable with older planters, but it might be a little more involved. A burn down a Roundup 2,4-D was done at corn planting time. We couldn't put anything that had much residual because we didn't want to damage the cover crop. But when the corn was about 3-leaf stage, a cover crop mix was drilled over the top, and this beat the corn up some, but the growing point of the corn is still below ground till about 5-leaf stage, so it grew right back out of it. And there are ways to interseed cover crop in between rows without driving on the corn, but drilling over the top was just the simplest, and we went at a little bit of an angle just to minimize hopefully minimize damage to the corn. This was the cover crop mix that we used, and I got to give a little shout out to Millborn Seeds because they're the ones that put this together for me. It's a premix that they had kind of designed just for wide row corn. I don't know what I would really add to it. I think there's things that could be added, I'm sure. I don't think I would take any one of these out. I thought they all kind of had their fit. We had stuff flowering during different times of the year and stuff that kind of, ran its course early, like buckwheat, and then, the next thing would take over. So it was just always fun to go out there and kind of see what crop was doing what as the growing season progressed. But one observation made, kind of interesting, there just seemed to be more biomass in the east-west rows during July and August because the angle of the sun, I think, is more overhead as it comes across the sky. And then as the calendar moved toward fall, the north-south rows actually allowed more sun to penetrate in between the rows with the lower angle of the sun. And like at first I wasn't impressed with the ryegrass, but then most of the field was north-south rows, but then but it really came on strong in the fall. And I think it's just partly because the angle of the sun changed and it depended how much the corn was shadowing. We did get the girls in there the end of November, and I was pretty concerned that the cows would overindulge and go straight for the cobs, which they basically did. But we really didn't have any problems with acidosis or stuff like that because I think the corn was quite immature and it barely was dented when it froze. And that was kind of the goal as far as picking the maturity day length of the corn. I listening to the Canadians who are grazing corn, they really don't want the corn to mature. Kind of, if they can get a frost when it's half milk line, it's just a lot safer to graze. And, if it was more mature than that, then I think you'd really have to manage the grazing. You could only give them however many acres at a time. But when I observed them grazing, they would consume the whole cob, husk and all. And I think this, along with grazing the cover in between the rows, acted as enough of a buffer. The cows and calves had really good condition on them going in there, but it seemed like they only put on more weight. I think it was just a very high plane of nutrition. And I noticed the calves picking cobs off the plant like mom, and a situation like that, you just put calves out there, they're not going to know how to pick cobs off a plant necessarily, but I never like to pass up the opportunity to let a cow teach her calf about a new feed. And so when I pulled them off of this piece, I kind of figure a pair and a half or 1.5 animal units per pair, just because of, they have a 600-pound calf at their side. And I was getting close to 60 head days an acre when I pulled them off. And the only reason I did that is because I had other cover crop to graze. So this is just a video of the next piece we went to. One thing you know, we use head days an acre or cow days an acre to try and put a value, a dollar value per acre on something we've grazed. But I don't think this is a very accurate picture because we're not taking into account how the animal performed during that period. And I don't get it done, but I'd like to get weights in and weights out just to be able to more accurately help us figure out a dollar per acre. I mean, it's one thing if you're just maintaining cows, but you know, if we're going to make these cows pay on our cropland, we got to figure out if we're doing that or not. And then this was just a shot of we put the cows back on the wide row corn after the calves were weaned, and they're still, I'm feeding them out there, but they're still picking away. So it's a little hard to get a real accurate cow days per acre here, but it was good. I want to try it again next year, and I want to harvest a corn crop, and I think I'd be pretty happy if we didn't give up, if we could maintain yields, or even if we gave up slightly on yields but had that excellent grazing opportunity. That's that. You probably noticed I like my black white face. I've kind of tried to stick with F1 black baldy cows over the years. They're too big, but I do feel I just really try and take advantage of hybrid vigor and heterosis, but I haven't figured out how to get the stripes on them yet. So this is the last practice I'm going to talk about, at least in any real amount of detail here, just for the sake of time. I don't know how we're doing on time, but this has kind of been one of my go-to practices over the last several years. And we start out with a small grain intended for hay, and then follow it with a cover crop cocktail. And I would argue that in southeast North Dakota, a cover crop planted in June it's not a full season cover crop. We just need to use more moisture in May and June, and we have to be able to produce more forage to cover our high land costs. So I start out with a cool season small grain hay, followed by a cover crop cocktail. And I've used peas and oats combination, spring triticale, forage barley, but I think the one that I prefer the most has been forage barley. One reason for that is moving away from the pea oat combo is just the need to make a herbicide pass. Nothing expensive, just some MCPA for broadleaves. And I also like forage barley because it seems to do pretty good. You can seed it about as soon as you can be out in the field, or you can seed it about as soon as you can be in the field after the snow is gone. Usually ready to cut for hay the end of June. And we're not harvesting it for a grain, so we kind of try and cut it as early as we can, so we can get the cover crop reseeded while we still have a lot of growing season left. And after getting the hay rolled up, I like to move the bales into a single row somewhere in the middle of the field, and then this cover crop is planted as soon as possible. And we like to put a hot wire up around the bales right away, so you don't have to wade through the tall cover crop trying to get this hot wire up. But this is this is one mix that I've used. There's several variations, but this is one example after the forage barley. And this cover crop ends up being a really good place to bring cows home from pasture in November and dump them in here. The reason I like the single row of bales in the center part of the field with the hot wire around it is, well, the hot wire obviously keeps the cows off the bales when we're grazing, but it's really easy to just reach over the wire with the loader tractor and then feed the hay back on the same field. So everything we grew on that field, we're feeding it back out on the field. My preferred method of feeding and redistributing the hay is a bale processor. Rolling it out probably works fine. But sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do, depending if it's frozen or dry. The bale processor works nice, and I say that just because we're feeding on cropland that I want to no-till the following spring, so that even distribution of residual feed is critical. We can handle a lot of residue if it's evenly distributed, but I don't want to have to go out there scratch around with a chisel plow trying to break up, clumps of hay. It might be a good thing long term for soil health, but it's not a good thing if I can't establish a crop because it's too much of a mat. But and then this slide here just shows what I want the ground to look like after feeding with the bale process. I'm not afraid of some residual feed, but just getting that even manure distribution and even feed distribution. And so it's ready to be no-tilled the next spring. I'll just show you this quick video. Disappearing cow there. So that's what the cover crop looked like 1 year after the forage barley. It had a lot of sorghum sudan in the mix. I put the cows out there, and then 2 days after we got a hard frost, and I thought, what the heck did I do? They're all going to die from prussic acid because you're not supposed to graze sorghum sudan for a week after a hard frost. But I couldn't find them or to get them out of there if I wanted to, because you probably saw how that cow disappeared. It turned out fine, and I just think it's because how diverse the cover crop mix was. They were able to eat, and they were eating enough other stuff, so it wasn't an issue. The year we did the year of that video was, I look back and I almost find it hard to believe, but I did figure 229 head days an acre after the cover crop was grazed and all the forage barley was fed back on the field. So that is a situation, I guess, where we can cover our land costs with only grazing. Well, I guess technically it's not only grazing because we rolled up that barley hay, but the combination of the two together, then if we have a decent year, we can get up there to pay for our costs with something other than stinking beans and corn. Give me the next slide. Just this was feeding some of that barley hay back out. This is after they had trampled all that sorghum sudan down and had it, hopefully a lot of it grazed, but obviously some trampled. wasn't using a bale buster. It doesn't look like it in this picture, but it was muddier and wetter than what I wanted to feed with the bale buster. So I actually had bale feeders out there, and every day we moved the bale feeder and dropped the bales in and just kept moving it around the field. And then the next year I was planting the field, and this satellite picture popped up on my planner monitor, and I was like, oh, I could see how I did with my redistribution. I just thought it was interesting how that showed the placement of the bales. And it wasn't ideal because I did those rings, you know, there was a little bit too thick of a mat of the barley hay, and we struggled to get a crop no-tilled into that. So but you do what you got to do. So that's my scripted part of this thing. I got, I don't know, 20 slides here, and if you guys aren't too bored yet, I just want to whip through them and make about 2 comments on each one, because maybe you'll enjoy them.
I'd say go for it.
Okay, so this is what it looks like after we wean our calves. We do have a small egg waste system, and we keep putting in water lines, and we keep putting in tire tanks out in the field, because I want our fields to be the egg waste system, not this. And we try and keep them out of here as much as possible, and really not use it. It's kind of hard to keep them out of here on days like today, because I have really good wind protection here, and it's within walking distance to the house. I like walking out there and checking how much I need to feed the next day, how they're, you know, managing the bunk and all that. But honestly, the goal is to not have cattle in here. Trying to be more observant. What can I say there? One thing I try and observe is especially that cow pad on the left. I think that's kind of about the ideal. Just having that dish in the middle, probably about that 8% crude protein. And I think everything is room and function is working well. And if we're looser than that or stacking up more than that, we can make an adjustment with a little more fiber or more protein or whatever, but it's just a simple observation. Plants will adapt and compensate. I took this picture of a sorghum Sudan plant, and it was a single plant, and there was like 32. I tried to count them. I don't know how many tillers there was on there, but that's the thing with these cover crops. We had just a ton of prevent plant this spring, and I was stressed out about the decisions are about infinite when it comes to cover crop mixes and rates and species, and I just kind of decided, basically prayed about it, and the answer that I got was just get it out there. Let me take care of some things. So I think there's a message in that, and that's the beauty of diversity. You know, everything's not going to work everywhere, but something's going to work. This is just a really, really common thing in our area. It's too salty for the soybeans to grow there, but the CRP next to it, it's very productive ground. So I think that's, again, why diversity is so important. We got to have plants that will grow in that environment. This is some pasture at home that we've been a little bit hard on it, usually early in the spring, and it's had some long rest periods in the fall or in the summer, and it's just been awesome to see the warm seasons come back in. Big blue here and Indian grass here. My 12-year-old, he kind of likes machinery, and he think I don't know if I'm the cool dad trying to convince him that a radish is more exciting than a big 4-wheel drive tractor, but this is kind of the way we got to look at it. Adaptive management. I don't know if you should laugh at this guy or compliment him, because he's getting the job done one way or another. And when we do have to feed on the ground, you know, the purist is bale grazing, and they're doing chores, you know, for an hour once a week, and I haven't quite got there. We feed any way we can get things, the feed distributed and the residue managed, and whether that's square bales on the back of a pickup or with the feed wagon, but as long as we're out in the field, you know, it's just so much better to no-till beans into corn stalks that have been grazed and fed on. It's easier to plant into. I've had to plow snow. And then when you do plow snow, they don't like to go off the plowed path into belly deep snow. But, you know, we'll feed wagon graze. One time I told Cody Sand one time I was feed wagon grazing, and he said there was no such thing. But we're feeding out in the field, and I think we're accomplishing some of the same things. We put them in piles just sometimes, depending on conditions, just because when everything, you know, is in a circle with their heads pointing in, they're not crapping on quite as much feed as if you just drop it in a row. And then, you know, we kind of get that same effect. This is what it looked like where we fed the day before. We're getting that manure distribution and residual feed distribution. And then spring comes, and then it doesn't work to feed on the ground anymore. Richard, you might recognize this outfit here. This is a struggle. Last 2 years we had a blizzard before we did any harvest. So this is kind of what soybean fields looked like in 19. This was 18. This is one of my favorite slides, just because we have pasture out in Logan County, and this is kind of how nature adjusts to the edge of a low area. You know, you have something growing right next to the water, then you have foxtail barley, then you have some cattails and reed canary grass, and I don't even know what the other ones are, but you know, these layers of species, they'll move up and down the hillside depending on the water level. And that's just the power of diversity. We don't have that in a monocrop soybean field. This was a cover crop field that I was trying to illustrate the same thing. I had put a few pounds of sugar beets in this mix, and I wondered what the heck I did that for. I thought it was a waste of money. And then I'd get to these couple salty areas, and then there was no sugar beets in the rest of the field, but that was one of one of the things that grew in this salty area. So that's why we need these cocktail mixes. Oh, it's just a neighbor's field with about 3 foot of blown in soil along the fence line here. Overgrazed and undergrazed. Season-long grazing, you start to get this effect. They hammer the foreground there, and they don't touch the in back. The color isn't really good here, but this is some prevent plant on a field along the road, and you could see the salts crystallizing on the surface almost. Oh, I mean, it just was happening so fast. Overgrazed, undergrazed. I like this slide because, and I took it from someone else's presentation, and I don't know who, and I apologize for that, but you know, how do we make a cows competitive when these other animals can convert so much more efficiently? But I've come to realize that it's the cow's inefficiency. Most of what she consumes is going out her back end. That's what actually makes her such a efficient soil builder. So I've just come to look at that differently. Manage for what we want, not what we don't want. This took a little bit to sink in for me. Maybe for most people, probably not, but for me it did. The first couple of years we started grazing a little more intensely. We were pretty excited because, man, we could lock them up and we could make them eat anything. We could make them eat wormwood, thistle. But I think as we've gone down this road, I've realized that we're also doing way too much damage to the grass. So now we're kind of trying to take more the approach of, you know, graze that top third or maybe half and not worry so much about the weeds, but just leave that grass set up to be as competitive with the weeds as we possibly can. And when you're doing that, man, the cows get fat. And when you're doing the picture, the picture on the left isn't even grazed, you know, that hard, but when you're doing that more high energy, the top third of that plant is where all the nutrients and energy is, that the cattle really get fat. We still do, you know, feed some salt and mineral and have a scratcher out there, but I drag it around. I always, whenever we move the cattle, we drag this with, and I stick it in the middle of a snowberry patch. And then you get this, it really opens it up. There's a lot of kind of thatch, extra grass that needs working in. And then the next year you've opened it up, and then it looks a little more like this. You get some grass growing. That's some pasture. We've been cross fencing and developing water. Logan County water tank. Just you know, the value of increasing organic matter. And on this slide they have carbon as they don't have a value on here, but it's probably the most valuable nutrient. Is she talking? Oh. On one of the fields that we've probably had the most diversity and animal impact and doing all these principles, my soil test has shown all these different bars are different zones in the field. And in 4 years here, we've almost increased a full % of organic matter. So the goal is to definitely try and keep doing that. I might quit here. If any of you guys were Far Side fans, I was Gary Larson. He was a naturalist, or he's still alive. He's a naturalist, but he could tell a story with a picture. And to me, there's this is an analogy. I hope we're well, the analogy would be the pilots are humans and the plane is planet Earth. So we need to right the ship here.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, first of all, just like to thank you for sharing your operation. And that was great. I mean, it's so helpful to see this. And it appears from your vegetation, you might be farming in the tropics. I'm not sure. It looks fantastic. So probably Trish or I later will maybe sum this up a little bit. But I think at this point, Trish, would you be in agreement? We maybe take some questions. And if you have some, Trish, that are already sent in, we'd probably start with those. And then maybe after that, we can open it up to people who want to unmute and ask their question that way. So Trish, let's turn it
Sounds
over
good.
to you. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we did have one that came in here. First of all, great pictures, and they agree with the balancing act. It says, and this is coming from out in my kitchen, this comment. So
Good.
it said, we're different, obviously, because we're sitting out here in the drought capital of the world. But and Donnie was just asking, he said, I understand you've grazed the rye. Have you ever used it put it up in the bale?
Yeah, I've baled some rye, and I think the rye in particular, as far as small grains go, you probably want to cut it sooner than later. Like rye has a pretty aggressive beard on it that can cause some problems, and it just seems like once it starts jointing and boot stage and heading out a little bit, the carbon to nitrogen ratio changes really fast, and it's just a lot more palatable feed. And it's kind of that way with a lot of small grain crops. We always want more, so we want to wait to cut it, but then our hay ends up looking more like straw. And the other thing too is this, if you can cut it sooner or graze it sooner, you have more time to grow, hopefully more growing season to raise a good cover crop and more biomass.
Okay. Let's see here. I was wondering, when you were talking about planting the corn and then having the cover crop in between the rows, have you noticed a change in beneficial insects at all?
Nothing. I mean, I'm not an entomologist, but I just know there was a heck of a lot of insects out there. And like, I would say I noticed really nice bee activity there. The buckwheat is, even though there was just a small amount as far as seeding rate, the buckwheat seemed to do really well, and it was full of flowers, and there was lots of bees in it. And I'm basically just assuming with that many different species out there, and some of them flowering, I think it was good for insects, but I can't really say what.
That's fine. I was just curious if you had personally noticed any difference from what you had been doing in the past. So,
and well, just one comment on that too. There was one, I think it was forage colliard, big wide leaf, and there was some insect that completely mowed it off. And I was like, what the heck? when they said forage colliered, I was thinking forage for my cows, not for insects, but
It's a balance. It's a
yeah,
balance.
so there was some nitrate, and then you could see all the insect poop, below. So there was some nutrient cycling going on in season there, but it actually, whatever insect that was, went away, and it grew back out of it. So there's good and bad out there. Maybe that, yeah.
Interesting. Mark, I see you're on here. If you want to unmute yourself, you can sure ask your question if you'd like to.
Yeah, please.
Okay, no, I was just wondering, Mark Taylor at Ypsilanti, do you divide up your cover crop fields, or do you do them all in one large quarter at a time, or whatever they are?
We usually try and divide them up. Like, yeah, it just seems like there's a little more efficient use of the forage, but also I think it helps keep the cattle regulated and a little more consistent plane of nutrition. Like, for example, where we did the small grain hay followed by the cover crop, I try and divide it in fourths. So we'll graze off a fourth of the cover crop and then feed a fourth of the hay, and then continue on like that. But I think if you can divide it up, it's always better. Get to a point where you're happy with the amount that's left and then move on.
Yeah, we found where they'll just go pick all the best stuff out around the
Right.
quarter first, otherwise.
Yep.
Thank you.
I don't have any more written questions. So if you want to ask a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask that at this time.
We'll give everyone an opportunity. While we're doing that, one comment I was going to make, Christof, is regarding the corn. We weighed our yearlings, open heifer yearlings at the Minokan farm before and after we grazed the 60-inch corn this year. And we were operating at roughly 40 to 45% of average precip. So, we were a little dry here, unlike yourself. But they still, with leaving half the material in the field, they still produced 200 pounds of beef per acre.
Mm.
And so it was a nice shot for handling it that way. Obviously, we could have took more, but I mean, that was the better material that we took, and the rest we needed on the soil. But kind of gives you some idea in your environment. I would expect that number to be, significantly more. Or even in our environment at a so-called average year, I would expect we could do even more than that. So kind of gives you some idea at least.
Yeah, thanks. So what did the corn look like? I mean, was there mature kernels?
Pretty close. When we went in to graze, we could have let it go to maturity, and we could have harvested it. But it wasn't a great yield with our year, but we could have done that. But we felt it was probably more prudent for our purposes to take it as a grazing, which we did. But we had perennials and annuals in between the 60 inches.
So did you limit the amount that they could have
We moved them daily.
daily?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So we did, yes.
Okay.
Tried to keep a good density, and it was 25 yearlings and about 25 to 30 dry ewes. But they made a nice group. They did well. Yeah.
Mhm.
Question for Christof, excuse me, from anyone at this point?
I do have another one that came in on Facebook Live.
Okay.
Do you have a comparison of stocking rates moving from summer grazing grass onto a good year's crop?
Well, I think if I'm getting the question right, is the question basically, how many animals can we stock on range versus covers?
That's how I'm taking it, yes.
Well, it depends where, like we don't have as much pasture right around home here. We haul our cows 40 miles, well, some of them anyway, we haul 40 miles west over by Fredonia, North Dakota. And I mean, that's kind of a different world over there. It's rocky and thinner soils. And so our stocking rates there are, and we're trying to improve how we graze, but that's definitely less over there than what the cropland here, rangeland here compared to cropland here. It's a little bit of a tough question, but I would say we could, like that example where we did the small grain hay followed with the full season cover, we're beating that by quite a lot compared to range next to it as far as head days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another one that just came in, obviously you've been able to extend your grazing season with the use of your cover crops. Would you say by doing this that you've had a change in your quality of life? And maybe Kelly wants to answer
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think so. Good point.
Well, a couple things. This year, we had lots of prevent plants, so we had lots of cover crop just because we were able to get covers planted on all our prevent plant acres. And I would say our quality of life was better, but some of it's just because it was kind of an opportunity. And it took some work getting this stuff fenced and getting the cows moved around. We're not continuous, so you know it's 5 miles down the road in one case. But at the same time, with all the prevent plant, we weren't busy harvesting all fall. So I really liked it. The cattle have never done better as in terms of health and condition. And I kind of I didn't miss harvesting. So it's kind of a tricky question, but yeah, anytime we're grazing instead of feeding something, I'm pretty happy. I would rather be fencing, and Landon's really good. He's about helping it get all this fence put up and take down temporary fence around cropland acres. So we enjoy moving the cows around doing that.
I have another question for you. Obviously you've tried some different things. Is there something that you are curious about that you're looking at changing going into the future that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, good question. Lots of stuff. I just got to think about one. So one thing about these commodity prices, they've taken a big jump up. So, you know, in a way, it's a little tougher to get away from going back to corn and beans, just because it's tougher to afford to do it. But I think, you know, I really think grazing corn has a lot of potential. There's no plant that has the vertical structure that corn does. You know, we get into with these cover crops into the winter, and it just seems like I'm not quite sure where that biomass goes, but we don't get the head days out of them that we think we're going to when we look at them in the summer. But corn, and then you know it falls over and can get covered with snow, and corn doesn't. It has the ability to stand there, and it provides some wind protection, just the plants itself. So, and then I think, no, I don't know where I'm going with this, but as far as one practice, I think just the relay cropping or intercropping thing fascinates me. Whether that's, we've done planting beans into the rye, but we terminate the rye. I think the next step would be to, harvest the rye and then let the beans come through. That would be something that I'm pretty interested in trying. And maybe that means, maybe we're growing rye on 60-inch rows and then growing beans in between those rows, something like that. But if we can harvest that crop with the cows, I'm pretty happy with that too. So I know more grains. There's a couple grain farmers that are trying this, really going down the road of intercropping, but that definitely fascinates me.
I just think it's very interesting, the different options that you've tested and tried. So a lot of people out there that are interested in doing it but haven't taken the step yet to try a few of those things. So Jay, do you see anything else that has popped up? I think we're good.
Other than my own question that I want to ask him,
Yep.
if I can squeeze that in. Okay.
Sure.
Something, just an observation. This fall at the Minokan farm, we took the previous 11 years and we did a real detailed soils workup this fall. And so I've been in the process of putting that together in chart form and some usable manners. The interesting thing was this: there's 10 fields. The field that gained the most in soil organic matter, okay, all 10 fields were managed differently. But the field that gained the most soil organic matter was the corn for grain, followed by the next year with a full season cover crop and managed grazed. Okay, so it was corn the first year, harvested, managed grazed that fall, and then the following year it was a full season cover crop managed grazed. So that had the largest soil organic matter gain. So now when I look at what you've done, my thought would go here, and my question to you would go here, is you've combined these 2 years, right? With the 60.
Basically, yeah.
You've combined these 2 years. So I see you as accelerating biological time. And we've done something very similar, but I don't have that data yet. I'm going to let that play out a bit yet. But I think you are on track with fields like that to accumulate carbon, more carbon in a given year, because you have every green plant's a carbon inlet. And you have a lot of plants in that system. And those plants, most of them, it appears like they're flowering at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
Buckwheat probably goes out of the gate first, and then there's the next and the next. And so from a viewpoint of the biological end on the insect world, you're offering a constant food supply. And so I see that possibilities in the 60-inch corn for livestock integration, high plane and attrition. I think we're probably going to accelerate some carbon in those particular fields. So real interesting to see what your thoughts are going to be on those fields. I think you said that was your first year on 60.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, so I think it'll play out, but I think it's got a lot of potential. So I was just curious what your thoughts were. I think if I remember right, I heard you say you were going to do it again.
I want to try it again, and just kind of expanding on what you're saying. I remember you're the teacher and I'm the student here, so
we're all in this together.
But one question that pops up in my mind is, it seems like it's an opportunity to raise corn on corn, because if we could just move over and plant corn in that cover area.
Yeah.
And it's a high carbon system, and I'm calling it corn on corn, but there's just a lot. It's like adding a 6-8 year rotation into 1 year if you can have all those different species.
Yeah, and I think there is that opportunity, and I think from the crop diversity aspect of it, I mean, that's pretty powerful. And the synergistic effect of all that root mass under the soil And from a salinity viewpoint, you're growing out your water. You got the down cover, so it's that's got a lot of potential. It definitely caught my eye right away in your system here, but some great things in here. And I'm hearing a lot when I hear you talk. I look at your system. I think of balance, and I think you've achieved a lot of balance. And I think that's what it takes many times. Is that balance. You illustrated that very well when you talked about using the cover crops to fill in those void periods where there was no green plant, whether it was in the spring or the fall. And I know myself, I started in the fall. Well, I started with cover crops, or who would want those? That's where I started. And it took me a while to get my head wrapped around it, as to what they do and how they function. And then I got to the point where how can you possibly farm without them? And so you start going through those stages. But what I saw in yours is you filled in those blocks, those empty periods, and from the viewpoint of bringing carbon in the soil again, it's a huge aspect. So it's a great talk. Really good.
Well, there's lots and lots of room for improvement because I mean, those were some examples on some acres, and I just, the goal is to expand those type of practices on more acres, because I mean, like a struggle would be we could add a lot more cows at certain times a year, but then we hit March and mud hits and trying to figure out where to put these cows without completely destroying some of the stuff you've built. That's a real challenge. And I don't know, I just feel like I'd rather be a cow calf guy. You can address some of that by being a yearling person, and you get rid of them and then you bring them back, but I'd rather be a cow calf guy at the moment. So where do you put these things? At certain, you don't just put them on the shelf when it's not working out good.
And I think everybody that's put in a biennial like rye and got livestock on it the following spring have all experienced that to a degree, because all of a sudden it kind of sneaks up on you. It's growing. You're, well, maybe I should put them out. Maybe I should wait a few more days. Well, you should have put them out.
Yeah.
Because it's just going to blow past you.
Yeah.
And we've had that same scenario. So you get on a little bit earlier sometimes than you want, because overall for the season, then you come out a little closer to what you're achieving. But all of a sudden I need more cows.
Yeah.
You have other times a year, it's like, wait, I got way too many cows. It's always that balance again. But for sure, the biennial can really change that.
Another question that came in on Facebook: will you be soil testing your cover crop grazed fields and comparing it to your fields that haven't been cover cropped?
Yeah, we do soil testing, and I mean, I don't look at them and analyze them as close as I should. We're signed up for a MZB program, it's called, but it's basically we soil test zones and variable rate fertilize based on what that zone needs. But just that organic matter test, that was one of those, and that was on a field that we've been doing, has the longest history of some of these things, and it's really going in a positive direction. I just think that we're learning that high amounts of synthetic fertilizers, phosphorus, it can inhibit biology. So we used to think that was a good thing on a soil test. It was working capital, but that really what I want working capital is high organic matter levels. That's what the plants are going to borrow from. And my banker hasn't quite figured that one out yet. When I prepay fertilizer, I can put that on my balance sheet. But if I build a organic matter test on my soil test, to me, that should go on my balance sheet. If you look at the amount of nutrients in the percentage of organic matter, and if those are nutrients that we don't have to apply, maybe if I would start playing that lottery, maybe I don't need a banker, and then I won't have to worry about it. But until then, those are ongoing discussions. They kind of give me weird looks when I start talking about this stuff across their desk, but
Well, it might not be money in their bank, but it's definitely money in your bank.
yeah.
One other question that just came in, did your 60-inch corn out compete the cover crop, or did it get hurt by the competition, I think is what it's meant to say.
Honestly, and I was kind of trying to get that fertilizer thing figured out on my planter, but I think I was around that 15 gallons. That one slide, that we were in 60-inch rows, and I still think the corn probably covered 2/3 of that, square foot. So I think actually the corn was out competing the cover crop for the most part. That's good if you're trying to maintain corn yields, but there was times where I actually wanted to see more cover crop because I knew it was going to be 100% grazing. But that kind of goes back to those plants compensating thing. It was unbelievable how wide those rows were and how that corn filled that space up when it had the space to do so. So I don't think the cover crops competed with the corn too bad.
Okay.
And once they're established, there's actually the connection, the mycorrhizal fungi connection of those plants, and then you're over the hump, and she's going to work together as an ecosystem, like you described earlier, and that's exactly what happens. Yeah. Trish, another question?
Those are the only ones I see printed. Unless somebody would like to unmute themselves and ask, you're more than welcome to.
There's an opportunity. And anyone like to unmute and ask a question?
It's always like awkward dead space because you want to give them a chance to find their unmute button, but it seems weird while you're sitting there.
I just have one other while we're waiting. I don't want to interrupt anyone that wants to ask a question, but the forage barley with the cover crop. When I look at that field, I look at it from the viewpoint of no carbon exporting. And so you've managed to keep that material in the field. You managed to run it through a ruminant. And now all of a sudden, all that high carbon material becomes a more low to mid carbon, and nutrient release is there. All those things happen versus putting it on a truck and never seeing it again. And so that's another opportunity to look at those fields, because that's you're bringing a lot of food into that system. And so I think whether it's a cover crop field that somebody asked the question about, or a field like this, even PLFA biology test is likely going to show some things as well, or a Solvita respiration. Those are things that are definitely going to make a difference. So that one caught my eye also, because it's never evil to make a bale. I think the only thing evil is sometimes where they're fed.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of at the end of the day. But okay, did we have another question, Tris? I think so.
I haven't seen anything else.
I did see one pop up there.
I thought I saw one pop up too.
Oh, yep. Okay, yep, I do see it. Okay. What's been your best winter water setup for the cover crop grazing? I'm glad you saw that because I missed that one. Sorry.
I guess we got several of these installed now, and I want to install more of them, but basically we're just using the, the earth moving tire tanks with a riser pipe. And whenever I put one of these in, I also lately I've been putting a hydrant beside them just for that backup, or if we're using it in the summertime and we want to be more mobile with a portable water tank, then we got the hydrant there. And if you're going through all the work of trenching or plowing this water line in, you might as well put a hydrant in while you're at it. You just have more options. But really for winter grazing, as far as an energy-free drinking tank, the big earth moving tires with the riser in the middle, and I would go for I would use as big a culvert almost as you can for your riser pipe coming up underneath the tire, because why not let as much heat rise as you possibly can. And we got a couple where we've bought them where the lids were made, and then we had a couple open top ones where we made lids for them. And I even had a picture here that I was going to show of some of them, but I don't know if I'm describing that well enough. But they seem to work really well, even on, and then I think another key thing is our float valves we buy, we can get them with little bleeder valves, so that, that there's always a small amount of water flowing when temperatures are like tonight. And if you have a decent amount of cows drilling, you can have an energy-free tank there that just requires a little bit of chopping of the drink holes open, in the morning. Or usually if we when you're grazing, it wouldn't be the case, but if we feed, then after about half hour after we feed, we go and check the water tank, because that's when the cows all start heading for water, and they seem to work out pretty good. If I didn't explain that well enough, ask whatever I missed, I guess.
Kenny, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question? No, maybe
Nope,
not.
maybe not. Okay.
Okay. I don't know, just a few of the things I guess I noted while Christof was giving his presentation was manage for what you want and not for what you don't want. And that's one thing that, I don't know, that's more people need to really think about that statement. There's a lot of truthfulness to that. You need to be in the black to be in the green. I thought that was an interesting comment. And you don't need to know all of the biological interactions. I do think, sometimes it's if that's your thing and you can dive into that and you can get as much information out of that as you'd want to. But I think the big thing is if you can see the big picture and what's really happening out there as you're making these changes, whether it be the intercropping of the cover crop in the corn or whatever practice it is. If you can see the benefit that you're receiving, and sometimes it has a dollar value attached to it, and sometimes it's hard to put that dollar value on it. So the other one that I thought was really important that you said was everything is going to work. Everything isn't going to work everywhere, but something will work there. So that was another one that I made note of to myself too. So Jay, were there any other ones that you caught?
There was, and it's so true. I think it's one of your opening comments. 20 years ago, we weren't talking about biology, and that's so true. And most of what we learned about biology probably occurred in the less than 20 years. But that part was very, very true, and I think we're starting to understand its function a little bit more in pest management and a little bit more in nutrient management. And I look back at some of those old standards and specifications, and there's no mention of biology in them. And that's, it isn't that what's in them is wrong as it is as much as it's incomplete. And there's more of the story. And you're starting to unfold some of that. And I guess the other thing that I appreciated that came out tonight was how the livestock were the bridge. And they are a walking, populating biological transfer for sure. And so I think anytime we can bring them in, plants, animals, and soils evolve together. And I think it's how we build these soils back. So you had a great example of that this evening as well. So just my thoughts, Trish.
Good thoughts. Unless we'll give you one more chance if there's any other questions that you want to type in, or if anybody wants to pipe up, but I think we're kind of toward the end here of wrapping up, and we'll be back on Thursday evening at 7 Mountain, 8 Central Time with Rob Kramer. Oh, there was a question, that last chance. Okay. Have you worked with any federal or state agencies with cost sharing or cover crops, fencing, or water line? And if so, what has been the greatest impact for your farm?
Yes. We've done about every program there. I mean, I'm sure not everyone, but I've really tried to take advantage of equip contracts. I'm in the CSP. I've worked with Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever. And I'll be honest, some of them can be a hassle because there's hoops to jump through, and you know, you got to do things by their standards, whether it's fencing or, you know, water tanks. You got to have that capacity out there that sometimes you don't think you need or whatever. But all in all, I think, especially for a young person, you got to seek them out, because developing water is expensive, and there's programs that are definitely going to help you pay for that. So I would encourage anyone to take advantage of them, because they're definitely out there.
And find a fit. Find the one that fits.
I mean, yeah, I don't know which one has been the best. You know, we've done quite a bit with equip over the years, so that's been good.
And that's a good lead into just a little pump for the Grazing Lands Coalition and the program, the Grasslands Regeneration Program. So if there are individuals on the meeting tonight with us that are interested, please reach out to me, and I am more than willing to be the liaison to kind of work between you and trying to find that program that is a good fit for you and with what you're trying to do in your operation. I just had a gentleman call yesterday about wanting to plant some cropland back to grass, and there are tons of resources out there right now for seeding cropland back to grass. So don't go out there and take that expense on yourself when there's all these opportunities that are available. So that's just a little plug for that program, and it has been really good. And like you said, equip is a great program for a lot of that. The Bakken Working Lands program has been good to work with. The Partners for Wildlife through Fish and Wildlife Service, DU. I'm missing some, but those are kind of ones that, you know, have stuck out to me. So.
And another thing, Trish, since these are archived, they're videoed and archived. So people that wanted to maybe weren't on the panel with the government entities that were offering this type of assistance could go onto your site and view that one.
Yes.
I think that would answer some of their questions probably. I think it was called Partner Panel.
Yes, and that video is on the Facebook page. That's actually on my list of things to do for tomorrow. I will get that uploaded onto the YouTube channel. So thank you for the reminder. Yeah. So unless you have anything else, Jay, and by the way, Christof, you can tell your daughter that you started out with 12 people on Facebook Live, and at one point you had increased up to 18. And the Zoom call did not ever drop down below 33. So
I didn't put too many people to sleep then. Evidently.
no, so she might have to eat her words.
But
tonight.
if you just fall asleep, you probably didn't hit the end button. So you just...
Yeah, well, we greatly appreciate you sharing your story, and I had a couple people that commented that on here too, that, you know, great job, and thank you for sharing your story with us. And like I said, we'll be back on here Thursday evening with another one of our grazing land mentors, Rob Kramer. Rob has a diversified livestock operation with both sheep and cattle, so we'll get a little touch of that. And Jay, any closing comments?
I just want to thank Kelly for her IT work this evening.
Yes.
And,
Me too, because it wouldn't have happened if it.
Well, sure. We all
I'm
need
lucky
support.
to be able to send an email. So I tortured them all trying to get this PowerPoint put together. Let me tell you.
You
Well,
did great.
You did a wonderful job, and really appreciate both you being here this evening. And thank you also, Trish, for all your work as well, and the Grazing Coalition for even putting this entire Munch on this series together. So thank you very much.
Okay, have a good evening, everybody, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, let me take a picture of this comment. It says Dad's a rock star.